Amen.
Let her rip, Hannah.
Thank you all for being here. Like Travis said, I love to read. It's not that I'm an expert parent. Y'all know my baby is 1, so she hasn't asked me for a phone yet, but she does try to grab mine sometimes. But like he said, I've read more books than this, listened to tons of stuff, even before I knew I wanted to talk about this at church, just for my own knowledge. And Daniel and I, as we were stepping into parenthood, started looking into this. And the more that I learned, the more I was like, this is something that we need to talk about as a church. And so, this research and some of the stuff we're going to go over tonight, it's opened up my eyes to some hard truths and things that I need to repent of, changes we've made. And so there'll probably be some times where maybe you feel a little uncomfortable or feel like, oh, I do that and maybe I shouldn't, or whatever it is. And so I just want you to know, it's okay. It's not like, oh, this is supposed to make you feel bad and you're supposed to go change a million things tomorrow. But I do hope that maybe you change at least one little thing tomorrow. And I think, like Travis said, I hope this is something that you can share with if your spouse isn't here, obviously sharing with your spouse and with your community group or people that you're walking with, because this is something that is easier done when we do it together as parents and families. And we even have some people here who aren't yet parents, and so we love that they're here and want to learn as well. So we're going to start just with the verse that we use to talk a lot about family discipleship. Would someone read this for me? A volunteer? Matt, thank you.
Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words that I am giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 8.
Thank you. So this verse, also known as the Shema, is a really important verse in the Old Testament, and it's a key verse that we use for family discipleship. Just this idea of not only we as parents first loving the Lord wholly, but teaching that to our children and repeating that to our children. And Jesus echoes this idea of loving the Lord with your heart, soul, mind, and strength in the New Testament when he's asked which is the greatest commandment. And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus makes it really clear. He wants us to love the Lord wholly and fully, and then he wants us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And as parents, we get to teach our kids that. So what is our goal? As believers, our goal is to love God, like I said, fully and wholly, love our neighbors as ourselves. And our goal as parents is to live a life that invites our kids to do the same. So how do we do that? How do we invite them? These are just a couple ideas. By no means is this a full list, but the first thing is just showing your kids the truth, beauty, and goodness of who God is and what he has done. And I really want to focus in on this as we get started. We're going to talk a lot about limits and withholding things until certain ages and stuff. But I don't want your kids to think being a Christian means all these things I can't have or all these things I can't do. And we talked about a similar idea if y'all were here for the Birds and Bees class a year or two ago. What we really want to do is show our kids how beautiful and good life with God is, and that the world's going to try to sell them all these things like sex and unlimited access to this on your computer or whatever, this. That's where you're going to find happiness. That's where you're going to find joy. But we want to show them that those things will never satisfy. There's only one thing that can truly satisfy you, one thing that your soul is truly built for, and that is a relationship with the Lord. The phrase we used at the Birds and Bees class was, we don't just want to build walls of here's what I need to keep out or need to keep my kids away from, but we want to draw them to the well, something that draws them in, the well of living water. That only the Lord can provide. And so our goal is to point them to that. And we can help point them to that by ourselves living authentically and joyfully with Jesus, them seeing that joy, that life in us. And then as a family, we want to develop wisdom and courage together. So that phrase of wisdom and courage, that comes from Andy Crouch. He's a Christian author. He's a big business leader. He's amazing if y'all have not heard of him. I'm going to send out an email after this as well with all these resources and links. But Andy Crouch writes in this book, the mission of our family for children and adults alike is to cultivate wisdom and courage. And I really love those two words because when it comes to our goal of loving God fully and loving our neighbors as ourselves, we need wisdom and we need courage to do that. We need wisdom to know what is good. We need wisdom to know how to choose the good. And we need the courage to be bold enough to do it. So his driving question he talks about is this going to help my family become less foolish and more wise? Is this going to help my family become less fearful and more courageous? I also want to note, we're going to have time for questions at the end, but if you're like, I really need to ask something or say something right now,
Send the slides.
feel free to
As we
send the slides. Yeah.
Send the slide, okay.
So thinking about our goals for our kids, let's dream big for a minute. What's your biggest goal for your kids? They're happy, they're successful, they're not in jail, they're faithfully following Jesus, maybe a combo. But I want you to take a minute with the people at your table and just talk about if you could change one thing in your relationship with those who are in your house. So for most of us, that's like our kids, our family. For those of y'all who aren't yet parents or married, just like maybe your roommate or who you're living with. Your roommate is better be who you're living with. But yeah, if you could change one thing about your relationships with those in your household, what would you change? And y'all can talk for a minute and then we'll jump back in. Everyone got to share, but since we're starting a little late, I want to make sure we have time for everything. But did anyone have like a common theme at their table of what's something you want to change about relationships in your home? Common theme? You want to share? Daniel, I heard you say, I agree with.
Yeah.
What did you agree with?
Our table all kind of said some version of like deeper relationships.
Yeah. Does that resonate with the other tables too? Deeper relationships? I overheard Dana saying like more present together. But yeah, okay, so let's just keep that in mind. When we have these goals for our family, for our homes, what is often getting in the way of that? Well, if you signed up for this class, you may have an idea of one of the things that gets in the way that we're going to talk about is technology outside of its proper place. And I love this wording of it because this isn't to say like we hate technology, all technology is bad, because that's not true. But technology outside of its proper place can be bad and can be detrimental to the goals we have for our families, the spiritual goals we have for our families. So the main question for tonight is not, someone read that question, is not, are screens okay, or
How much screen time is too much?
those aren't our main questions. But our main question is, are you forming your children, or are you defaulting to letting screens form them? So that quote is from Justin Whitmore Early. He wrote this book. It's really great. You should all read it. And he writes that we must always pay attention to what is grabbing the attention of our minds and imaginations, because where the imagination goes, so goes the heart. So if we don't teach our kids about big things like who God is, what sex is, what their identity is, what their purpose is, how do we have a good relationship with money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, screens are gladly going to teach that to them, and usually in a way that we don't actually agree with. Funnily enough, over the course of the weeks that we announced this class, we've had a kind of a squad of DBU students, like freshman, sophomore DBU students, coming to Junius, and one of them emailed me, Grant emailed me. He said, hey, I see you're doing this technology class. I need to tell you about my experience. My parents they gave me everything really early, and it was bad, and I want to talk to you about it. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, grab some of your friends, let's all go to lunch. So we went to lunch, and one of the big things they said was like, you need to talk about sex early, because the second that they have a smartphone, or even just their friend or kid that they know has a smartphone, everything that they learn is going to be coming from that instead of from you. And so it's not just sex. Obviously, that's a big one with things like pornography. But what stories do you want your kids to know? What do you want them to believe about who they are, what they're made for? Because everything online is itching to teach them that. But you, as a parent, have the privilege and the authority and the responsibility you should be doing that in a way that honors the Lord. So in the end, this is a fight for formation, is what this book says. And that's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. I just read a quote yesterday that I was like, I need to work this into. I think I have it in a later slide. But if you're not fighting for your kids, what are you saving your fight for? I was like, whoa, that's good. What are you saving it for? What's more important than this? I don't know. So technology in its proper place. Like we said, it's not always bad. But Andy Crouch has a great list of what does it look like for technology to be in its proper place. So Daniel, can you read the first one, the top left? Let's have a reading circle.
Okay. It helps us bond with the real people we have been given to love. It's out of its proper place when we end up bonding with people at a distance, like celebrities whom we will never meet.
Becca, can you read the next one down?
It helps us acquire skill in domains that are the glory of human culture, sports. It helps us acquire skill in domains that are the glory of human culture, sports, music, the arts, cooking, etc. When we let technology replace the development of skill with passive consumption, something has gone wrong.
So that's the idea of all we ever do is watch football, but we never play. Or all we ever do is watch cooking videos, but we never cook. Cynthia, can you see the screen? Can you read the bottom one?
It helps us cultivate all for the created world we are part of and responsible for stewarding. It's out of its proper place when it keeps from engaging the wild and wonderful nature world with all of our senses.
Perfect. Reagan, can you read the top right?
It helps us take care of the fragile bodies we inhabit. It's out of its proper place, but it promises to help us escape the limits and vulnerabilities of those bodies altogether.
Dana, do you want to read the next one?
Technology is in its proper place when it starts great conversations. It's out of its proper place when it prevents us from talking with and listening to one another.
Kara, do you want to read the last one?
Technology is in its proper place when we use it with intention and care. If there's one thing I've discovered about technology, it's that it doesn't stay in its proper place on its own.
So again, we can all see like the first half of that, like yeah, technology has probably helped us learn new things and connect with people, but when it's outside of its proper place, we've probably also seen the second half of those statements where it's holding us back from what's really full and abundant life. And Andy Crouch has this interesting concept. He says the risk as we introduce more and more devices into our life is that our lives get way easier, but they also get way less engaged. They require less of us. And this actually has a very profound effect on how children see their parents as they grow up. So just think about that. Like in your home, if we were to peek into your home, is everyone kind of just doing their own thing on their screen or on their phone? Or is everyone happy it's just kind of scrolling? Or are your kids like seeing you do hard things, seeing you develop a skill, seeing like you guys are outside playing together or they're playing together with their sibling, whatever it is. And he talks about the idea of, yes, technology makes things easier, and he even lists like specific, like central heating. It's so great that I can just go to my Nest thermostat and make it warm. We're not thinking about it being warm right now because we still need that AC going, but he's like, hundreds of years ago, if you needed it to be warm, you were like, okay, we're gonna go outside, we're gonna chop down this tree. You can get the kids involved in that. At one point, they can go out and do it on their own. And you're like seeing a tree, you're working hard, cutting it down together, you're bringing it in and you're enjoying like, what does it mean to sit around this fire together that we like put work into creating, now we're warm. Like that's a totally different perspective than a lot of the things we have now. And obviously, I'm not saying we should go back to needing to chop down trees all the time. But the next question I want you guys to talk about with your group is just what experiences are no longer part of daily life that used to be? And do you think that our lives always get better as they get easier?
Can you ask it one more time?
Yes. What experiences are no longer part of daily life that used to be? So that could be something like central heating and versus chopping down logs. And then just, do you think our lives always get better as they get easier? So talk about that for a second with your group. I'm going to cut you off again, but we're going to keep moving. Did anyone think that it's always better for things to be easier? Because if you think that, hopefully you won't by the end of class. I'm just kidding. But again, obviously there are great things that have been made easier, and there are great things we've learned from technology, or gained from technology, but life being made as easy as possible is actually not the goal of specifically Christians even. So let's talk about, this is technology in its proper place. So let's think about what might be the piece of technology that has crashed its way out of its proper place to the most dangerous degree. Anyone have a guess, a thought? Money as technology, interesting concept. No, I'm going with the smartphone for today. Money's a great one. That's the next class, I guess. But we're going to go with the smartphone for out of its proper place. We can all notice ways that our smartphone, does anyone not have a smartphone? Because if you do, then you actually win, you can leave. You don't need to be here. No, we probably all have one. And yeah, we've probably all noticed the ways that it sucks us in and steals our time and maybe does some of those things that we saw on the last list of Maybe we're bonding with people like celebrities instead of the people in front of us, or we're not listening to our kids because we're too busy wanting to check Instagram or whatever it is. Okay, but so we've noticed in our own lives probably how it's negatively impacted us at times. And even more so is it dangerous and can negatively impact the lives of children. So this next book we're going to quote a lot from is Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. This is a big book that came out this year that y'all might have been hearing about. I feel like it's pretty popular right now. And the interesting thing is that Jonathan Haidt is agnostic, but so much of this book is like so pointing to the benefits of kids being plugged into religious communities and our need for like the sacred and all these things. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I just thought that was really interesting, how much he values religious communities specifically. So he writes, this whole book is about the great rewiring, how the play-based childhood has been nearly wiped out by the phone-based childhood is what he calls it now. And his main idea is that we've overprotected our children in the real world and we have underprotected them in the virtual world, and that the consequences of that have been severe. So this is a quote. The first generation of Americans who went through puberty with smartphones in their hands became more anxious, depressed, self-harming, and suicidal. This tidal wave hit girls harder than boys and hit preteen girls hardest of all. And so this book, I would recommend y'all to check it out as well. Like, it's full of graphs, full of data. He has a website that has like a lot of it as well. But if you like want to see those actual stats, this book is full of them. We'll quote some more. But I didn't like put up a ton of graphs in this PowerPoint, but they're in that book if you'd like to look at them. So thinking about this idea of the phone-based childhood, let's look at what has gone wrong. What has gone wrong? What's gotten technology out of its proper place? So again, smartphones, social media, they're not really great for any of us. We can probably all see ways that it's impacted our lives as adults. And again, even more so for children. This quote, Gen Z became the first generation to go through puberty with a portal in their pockets that called them away from people nearby and into an alternative universe. They spent far less time playing with, talking to, touching, or even making eye contact with their friends and family, thereby reducing their participation in embodied social behaviors that are essential for successful human development. And I would argue that it's also pulled us away from things that are essential for family discipleship and for growing in Christ-likeness. So you may think it's too late to make a change, but one thing he really talks about in this book is that we have a history in our society of limiting minors' access to things that are addictive and negative. Cigarettes, alcohol, whatever it is, like we have made changes. Seatbelt laws have really come into effect to be more safe, specifically focused on children. So don't be hopeless. It's going to be a couple more negative slides for a while, but we're going to get hopeful in the end again. Don't worry. So what's interesting about Haidt's book is he has a lot of stuff about kind of child development and how we're wired, what kids need. So we're going to start with these left boxes of what kids need when they're growing, when they're developing. So first thing, physical play, outdoors, and with other children of mixed ages is the healthiest, most natural, most beneficial sort of play. So this is how kids played all throughout history, and it's still what we need. Unsupervised play is where children best learn to tolerate bruises, handle their emotions, read other children's emotions, take turns, resolve conflicts, and play fair. So again, that's the idea of not just, oh, they're playing soccer and there's really specific rules, but like there's no rules and they're just playing and they're making up the rules as they go, because that's how they really learn how to be like, that's not a fair rule. Or, if you're a younger child, you're like, oh, my older brother, he always changed the rules to so he would always win. That's what happened to me. And you just learn how to interact with that. And then another thing kids need is face-to-face conversations and shoulder-to-shoulder adventures. And when they're not finding those in real life, they will try to go do them on Fortnite because they're still built for it. But we want them to be doing that in real life. So we'll talk in a minute about some of the negative content that is out there on social media, on the internet for kids. But this quote really stood out to me. Even if the content on these sites could somehow be filtered effectively to remove obviously harmful material, so even if they weren't seeing anything negative, they were only seeing cute puppy memes or whatever, The addictive design of these platforms reduces the time available for face-to-face play in the real world. This reduction is so severe that we might refer to smartphones as experience blockers. Thought that was a good one. So before we go on to that next half of the slide, I want you guys to talk with your group, thinking about that idea of like shoulder-to-shoulder adventures, unsupervised play, playing with kids of different ages, whether that's your siblings, the neighborhood kids. Does anyone just share with your table, I guess, what was one of your favorite stories from childhood that like ties in any of those things? Adventures, playing outside, mixed age play. And then I want you to think about how old were you? And if you are a parent, the last question is, would you let your kid do that now? Think about it. Story they want to share? Any great memory from their childhood? No? All your childhoods were sad? I'm just kidding. No, I'm sure we all have something that comes to mind. And honestly, as parents, maybe we're like, oh yeah, it's weird to think now of letting my kid do that. But for whatever reason, my parent let me, and I made it. I made it through to be here today. And that doesn't mean that like all of these, anything that you remember is like, oh, you need to let your kid do that exact same thing. But it's just something to think about. Like, I was doing maybe some stuff that seems wild to me now when I was a kid. And by wild, I mean not like going out and partying, but just like biking halfway across town and all that stuff. It's like, maybe we're reluctant to let our kid do that now, but just something to be open to. Did you want to, you're giving me a look. No, Travis, like he wants to chime in.
Yeah, I think one of the thoughts I've had is I'm afraid of bad guys or afraid of abductions or like the idea of that has been, I mean, I thought the other day, I let Jet ride his one wheel from our house like 10 blocks by himself. Like, you're too late, I'm going. And so I took Wyatt to football practice. If you want to come up there, you can come, but Jet ride your bike. Somehow get there. I'm not waiting for you anymore. So he rode his one wheel 10 blocks. And then into the Woodrow neighborhood where some people think Woodrow's not safe, some people think it is, but just into the school, found the back of it, got the deal, and I had to go someplace else. So I didn't even know if he got there or not. And I was thinking, what if I was a bad guy and I saw one wheel, I would kick that kid off of it and take his one wheel and sell on the internet, But I had the thought of it, but I had to like kind of wash that one back. But no, God's got it. It's not that far. Surely he's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But those thoughts creep in now as a parent.
So your concern was for the one wheel, not for your son?
Yeah. I mean, like, but that made him a target, Maybe not him as a kid to be stolen, but to steal his bike, But I get your point. That's good.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. And honestly, like the last couple generations of parents have been fed a very strong stranger danger narrative that doesn't necessarily like match the actual statistics, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But it's fair. You want your kids to be safe. Like, I respect that. As I also want my child to be safe.
I think there's more awareness in general of all danger, not
Mm-hmm.
just stranger danger.
And we're getting a lot of that awareness, Kara. Yep. I didn't even have that point in there, but I should add it.
I mean, do these desserts have seed oils?
We make sure they do. The other thought I had was, it was good. Oh, no. Well, this idea of parenting now, they used to call them helicopter parents. I heard a phrase called lawnmower parenting. I never heard it before till the other day, where they just mow down everything in front of and make sure that there's no danger anywhere.
Conflict.
Yeah, lawnmower parents. I never heard it before till the other day. That's pretty good, and that's better than helicopter. At least helicopter, you're far enough away where you can't fix it on the minute. But in lawn mowing, you just make sure everything's clear and smooth, and then you let it figure.
Better.
No, I think
That's
helicopter.
right.
I think helicopter's better.
Free range is what I think the other end of the spectrum.
We love a free range. Okay, we're gonna keep going. I'll jump into the third one because that ties in to being the opposite of a lawnmower parent. Is we're gonna talk about ways kids are like biologically wired for brain development, all these things. Just like you have an immune system that gets strengthened when you're exposed to bacteria, germs. Psychologists talk about a psychological immune system. So when you're exposed to little challenges, little hardships, oh, I skinned my knee, or even I broke my arm. Like, we don't want our kids to break our arm, but like getting through that builds resilience. Or like my friends bullied me, or I was playing mixed group play with the neighborhood kids and they bullied me because I was the youngest, but like I got through it. Like, the only way you get through it is by getting through it. And like, obviously we'll talk, there's different levels of like bullying and things like that. But for the most part, when parents are lawnmowing over every challenge, your kid has no psychological immune system. And so then as they grow, they go off to college, they face the smallest challenge, they spiral. And that's why we're seeing, he talks a lot about these rising rates of anxiety, of depression, of just stewing on something for hours, days, weeks even. Something that a child typically who's gone through different risks and made it through to the other side is able to make it through that easier. So don't be a lawnmower parent. But let's go back up to the top. So children's brains are wired. There's a sensitive learning periods throughout childhood. The biggest thing we can think of is like, oh, kids can learn language easier when they're young. Similarly, kids are learning a language of like what's life about, what's good, what's cool, what's popular. And if the way that they're getting those messages is through something like social media or always being on YouTube or whatever it is, that's going to tell them a story like we've talked about at the beginning. That's going to tell them a story while their brain is sensitive to what is the true story that I'm learning. Like, what story do you want to be feeding them in this sensitive time? And then what's especially unique about things like YouTube and social media, where you can see this has this many likes, this has this many favorites, this has this many watches, is like, it is a very obvious, like, oh, now I know what's cool because this has more likes. It's not just like I'm out walking around and I heard two friends say like the new Taylor Swift album's cool when the Taylor Swift's first album came out when I was in like 6th grade. This is like, I'm literally always getting fed numbers of what's cool, what's popular. And so again, we just have to think of, as believers, what cultural story do we want our kids to learn? What do we want them to think about what is good, what the good life is, and how do we want them to be formed? Two more kind of different unique wirings of children is confirmation bias and prestige bias. So confirmation bias is we want to fit in with what others are doing. And prestige bias is we look for successful people to learn from so that we can succeed as well. So in history, that would be something like, this guy's really good at hunting, or this guy's really good at making this thing that we need for our little town. And you're gonna go and you're gonna learn from that. But again, if a kid is always on the internet at a young age or always on their phone, what are they gonna be learning about what is it like to fit in? Oh, everyone is, wearing this outfit, or everyone's going to Sephora and buying $100 worth of makeup when you're literally an 11-year-old and you have perfect, beautiful skin and like you don't need any of that. Or prestige bias, who's celebrated, who's cool? Oh, Kim Kardashian, oh, like this person, that person. Is that really who we want our kids to be looking at and saying like, that is successful, that's what I'm aiming for? And again, I'm sure there's people on social media like who are doing actually admirable things, but there are so many people who aren't, and those numbers are also high on, oh, this person's really popular, has 1 million followers. So social media has hijacked both of those, and this quote says, it's drowning out the culture of one's family and local community while locking children's eyes onto influencers of questionable value. We already talked about the psychological immune system. Another way that kids are uniquely wired is just during puberty. It's a time, obviously, so many things are changing, and that's when we need to be particularly concerned about what they're experiencing. If a kid's already feeling uncomfortable, they're already feeling like, I don't feel comfortable in my body, I don't know what my place is right now, what messages do they need to be hearing during a time like that? So to sum it up, smartphones have not given kids what they need, and they have hijacked how they're wired to their detriment. So we're going to talk about some more problems, sadly. Problems keep going. Haidt identifies what he calls 4 foundational harms. That's social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. So we're going to go through those really quick. Social deprivation. Children under age 14 spend twice as much time with tech as they do talking to their families. Let that sink in for a second. Sleep deprivation. Phones in bedrooms lessen sleep. They do that for adults as well. We've probably all heard this. And kids, especially like teens, well, really all ages, need sleep. I was listening to a forum from the Village Church about like kids' mental health from a year or two ago. Not even talking about technology or any of this. But it was these different mental health professionals, and they were like, people will come into our clinic, bring their kids, be like, my kid's depressed, my kid has anxiety, we need to get them on this medicine, we need to get them in. And they're like, okay, first of all, how much sleep are they getting at night? And like, that's the first question. And before you need to go into all these other steps, like just make sure that your child is getting enough sleep, because that has a huge impact on their health, their mental health, and their phone holds them back from sleep. I can remember being a teenager, oh, I'm going to bed, but like I charged my phone by my bed, and I'm okay, I'm going to bed, but I'm just staying up all night. And I'll touch on this again a little bit later, but Andy Crouch's book had a really interesting take where I was like, oh, it's like he knew me in high school. Because he talks about like the late night texting. We've all heard the phrase like, nothing good happens after midnight or whatever. But it's like nothing good happens on your phone after 10 p.m., 9 p.m., whatever bedtime is either. Because he kind of broke it down into two groups. There's the people who are really struggling with something. And in my high school days, kind of we'll talk about social contagion in a second, but the social contagion thing was cutting yourself. So I had a lot of girls that I knew at my school who were feeling really down, and again, it ties into puberty, all these different things. And they're like, I really want to cut myself. And it's nighttime, you're on your phone, you're like, okay, I'm going to text my friends, they're going to make me feel better. Okay, I'm thinking about cutting myself, I hate myself, blah, blah, blah. So you're either the kid that's really in a bad place, or you're the kid who's in a better place, and now you're the one receiving all those texts. So I would be in my bed getting like 5 texts from people telling me they're cutting themselves. I'm like, I have to figure this out. How do I help them all? And what he said both of those kids need is not a text, but they need to go into their parents' room and say, like, I'm really struggling. Or, hey, my friend's really struggling. How do I be a good friend to them? What they don't need is to just be in their phone at 10 p.m. texting. And that's just like one social aspect of it. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that are negative that we can be doing on our phones at night. But a big takeaway that we'll talk about in a minute is no phones in rooms for kids or adults, honestly. Okay, attention fragmentation. Constant notifications are going to stifle our ability to think deeply. We've seen that probably in our own work. Again, even more so for kids. Stifling their creativity. If you remember your childhood, again, thinking back to your own childhood, you didn't have something to do all the time. So you had to make up what was fun. You had to be creative on your own. You weren't getting interrupted all the time. And then lastly, addiction. 45% of teens say they use the internet almost constantly. Almost constantly. That's crazy. So those were the 4 that Haidt addressed in his book, and then these are a couple more drawing from some other sources. Another problem is inappropriate content. And when we think inappropriate content, maybe your mind just goes to pornography, and that is a big problem. But there's unfortunately a lot more kinds of inappropriate content than just that. So in real life, throughout history, we've had a stair-step path to adulthood. You can't access certain things, see certain things until you're a certain age. But on the internet, everyone is the same age. Yes, it might say you can only access this if you're 13, 16, 18, but all you literally have to do is click, yes, I'm 16, yes, I'm 18. So on the internet, everyone is the same age. You don't see more when you get older. You can see anything as soon as you log on. So this was a study done on teens during the COVID lockdowns. 47% of teens say they saw content online they wish they hadn't seen while in lockdown, and 1 in 7 saw harmful videos every day. A recent report from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, this was a group of researchers that were like, hey, we're just gonna make a TikTok or a clean slate, and we're just gonna see what happens as we like scroll through. Within 3 minutes, the algorithm was giving them content related to suicide, and within 5 more minutes, content related to eating disorders. And so the thing to understand about these, especially these algorithmically driven websites, they want you to be looking at it for as long as you can. And they've found that the thing that gets the most response out of you to stop, to look, and to watch are things that elicit fear, anger, or sadness. So it may be like, oh, but it's cute, there's cute dance videos and there's stuff, and like there is, and we've all seen it and laughed at a meme or whatever. But what they're gonna get the most of your time watching is things that elicit fear, anger, and sadness. So whether that's suicide content, eating disorder content, with all the different like wars going on right now, there's footage of like bodies that have been literally decapitated. Like these are all things that are accessible for your child to see.
And more broadly, just to maybe you.
No, go ahead.
Is algorithms both for us but also for kids of like whatever you feed, you're going to get fed more of it.
Exactly.
So it's as simple as like you go down the rabbit hole on ESPN of just like other sports, it'll keep feeding you sports. You can read sports news all day long, or like celebrity news, or whatever it might be. And like, are you intentional? Like, do I want more of this, or do I want less of this?
Exactly. The next problem is reality distortion. So again, what is normalized? What is celebrated? What do they think is real life? It's usually what a lot of kids are seeing is things like supermodel bodies, rampant consumerism, like we talked about, the big teenage girl trend of buying all this makeup that they definitely, or not even just makeup, but skincare, like that they definitely don't need. What else is normalized? Being quick to speak and slow to listen. It's like, oh, every problem can be summed up in a 3-minute soundbite. It's like they have no ability to read something with more nuance than that. What else is normalized? Oversharing, performing. There's literally videos of girls. It's very popular now to share about like your mental health struggle. And again, there's a balance of like people who are really struggling, but then there's also like, hey guys, I'm depressed today. Here's me having my depressive episode. And then they just like start crying. And you're like, why are you sharing that? Like, it's okay if you're experiencing depression, but like sharing that is not normal. Like, so again, just showing what do they think is real life is what's being distorted. And then lastly, exploitation and abuse, just child safety. This kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier with the stranger danger idea is what we're fed, this idea that like your kid could be walking down to the park and get picked up by a stranger, like a sexual predator. But that is so rare. The actual sexual predators, or if your kid is, if a child is a victim of sexual abuse, is usually someone in their own home, a family member, a friend. The kids at the most risk are kids who are living with a non-related male in the home. So that's like mom's boyfriend, or, you know, the cousin who moved in with us. Like, thinking of that as sexual predator is like the biggest risk to your kid who's just gonna find them on the street is like not the way you need to be thinking about sexual predators. But where the sexual predators actually are now is online. And they're making fake accounts and they're DMing your teenage daughter or your teenage son or your younger son or, you know, whoever it is. Because it's easier now to get the access that they want to kids, not from going and stealing a kid off the street. That's hard. But what's really easy is, hey kid, you know, and maybe it's literally asking for like nude photos or something, and you know, kids can get tricked into that. Or maybe, this was really sickening to read. Now with AI, they can literally like screenshot pictures or like take videos that your own child posts or even that we post of our children. And AI can like take their face and put it onto pornography. So it's not even that my child like took a picture of herself, like a nude picture of herself, but it's that she just posted a picture of her and her friend and now her face is like on pornography that's being shared. So even us as parents need to be thinking about who can see the pictures that we post. Or I deleted my Instagram after doing all this research. Maybe that's the decision you need to make. And I'm not saying you have to, but just being aware of things that are possible. Now, it's not the stranger danger on the street. It's the people who are accessing your kids online. And again, that doesn't mean that like there isn't ever the rare case of stranger danger off the street, but that's not where we need to be focusing if we're not focusing on this other aspect as well. So a couple more sad ones, I promise, then we'll get hopeful. But they have found that what's hurting girls and what's hurting boys is a little bit different. So we'll talk first about girls. So social media especially harms girls, and girls use it more. Girls are more affected by visual social comparison and perfectionism, and their bodies are changing rapidly during puberty. So again, puberty is the worst time to be like comparing yourself to supermodels on Instagram. Girls are more subject to predation and harassment, like we were talking about, like being DM'd by, maybe it's like an old man, or maybe it's just the boys in their class who are harassing them. And girls' aggression is more relational, and so a girl's not gonna come up to school and punch you in the face usually, but what a girl can do way easier now is like make a fake Instagram account making fun of you and share it with everyone, and like girls bullying each other online is way easier. Because it's more of that like subtle, like mean girl, like, oh, I'm gonna comment this like sarcastic thing or whatever about you. And girls more easily share emotions and disorders. I touched on like in my high school years, it was a lot of cutting was what a lot of girls were struggling with, because there is this level of for me, it was like Tumblr. Everyone was on Tumblr, which was this like blogging site. And one girl would be like, you know, I'm cutting myself. And then everyone would see it and be like, oh, it's kind of cool. And like, it's sad, but like, it's kind of cool. And everyone like wants to help you if you're cutting. And again, not to like minimize what some of them truly were going through, but the girls are more easily share like these different emotions, these disorders. Today we're seeing like a huge spike in teenage girls identifying as like, oh, I want to identify as transgender and like become a man, whereas historically like people experiencing gender dysphoria were men. But now it's like, oh, you can get in this like Reddit loophole where everyone's like, oh, we're all actually boys. And a lot of that, again, tied into my body's uncomfortable. I'm going through puberty. This can't be my right body then. I must be a boy. So all of those things are more difficult for girls. This quote is from a girl named Freya India who works with Jonathan Haidt. She's in Gen Z, and she writes that a 12-year-old's mind is no match for a giant corporation using the most advanced AI to manipulate her behavior. We as Gen Z were the first to have our vulnerabilities and insecurities fed into a machine that magnified and refracted them back at us all the time before we had any sense of who we were. Whatever insecurity or vulnerability they're struggling with, they will be pushed further and further into it. Kind of like what Dana was saying. If you are like getting fed eating disorder content and then you feel bad about your body and you're watching more and more, it's just going to feed you more. So for boys are disconnecting from the real world and investing in the virtual world instead. Some structural factors have made it harder for boys to succeed in the real world. So that's things like, again, looking kind of back for a couple hundred years of history, an economy that no longer rewards physical strength, an educational system that prizes the ability to sit still and listen, and decline in the availability of positive male role models. All those things are impacting boys where it's harder to succeed in the real life. So they're like, it's easy to succeed online, or not necessarily easy to succeed as a video gamer, but you see more and more boys be like, video games are everything. I'm gonna be a professional video gamer. Safetyism, this worship of safety above all else, this like coddling, this lawnmower parents, it's impacted boys more than girls. Boys need more of that like risky play and that exercise, like playing outside and all of those things. And while video games can have some benefits for like cognitive abilities, that's really just when they're playing minimally. It's not when they're spending hours gaming alone. But boys are looking to video games for adventure, for friendship, for danger, because they're not getting that in the real world. And then lastly, boys watch porn at higher rates, and modern pornography amplifies the risk for porn addiction. And an interesting kind of point he made is that they're seeing more and more boys just totally be like, well, I don't even need to try to like date anyone because I can get all the pleasure that I'm looking for, I can find on pornography. And I think especially for y'all raising boys to wanting them to have like the Christian sexual ethic, it's like, you have to date a girl, you have to honor her, you have to respect her, you have to like propose, you have to get married, and then you get to have sex, and it's like a beautiful thing within marriage, versus like, ooh, that sounds hard. You know what's really easy? Logging on and watching pornography. So that's something that's definitely impacting boys at a higher rate, although obviously both of these things can probably go across to each gender. And then, this is our last sad one. Okay, the spiritual cost. So like I said, Jonathan Haidt is not a believer, but he writes that we do have a God-shaped hole in our heart. And his quote is, if it doesn't get filled with something noble and elevated, modern society will quickly pump it full of garbage, which I thought was funny and true. And just this idea that the phone-based life creates spiritual degradation. And so I want you guys to talk with your group for a second about like what's a time in the past year or two where you felt really close to God, where you like felt his presence or his peace like really closely. Share with your group. I just want to ask, was anyone's time that they felt really connected to God looking at their phone? Or was maybe your phone not part of it?
So, I'll tell you a caveat though, I find this way more valuable for Bible study than anything else. So I would say it's during that, because anytime something comes up and I'll do long walks, like I was just talking about job change and things like that, the fact that I can listen to sermons, take notes while I'm walking, which you can't do with paper Bible.
Yeah.
But I think it's your
walking.
earlier point on, is it for outward focused or is it inward
Yeah.
focused?
And I think also literally walking, being
Yeah.
outside, not just being in your room, away from like people. I heard Rachel say Way Forward, which is the backpacking trip where they take your phone away. But yeah, just the idea of like, probably for a lot of us, it is like being outside in nature. And so we'll talk a little bit about, again, these are things that Jonathan Haidt, not a believer, listed out as like, what are our souls built for? And this idea of shared sacredness, that's like set apart time. So whether that's like Sunday worship, a day of Sabbath, places that call us upward, kind of like what you were saying, Dana, things that call us upward and are separate from day-to-day life. We need embodiment, that's eating together, singing together, playing and praying together. We need silence and solitude and stillness. That's like space to hear from God. If all we're doing is taking in, like it's hard to actually hear from God. And then we need moments of awe and beauty, and a lot of this is probably found in nature, in God's creation. Moments where we are transcending just ourselves, moments that show us how big and how beautiful God is. And just like what you were saying as well, Dana, it's like social media is very me-focused, or maybe me focusing on these different celebrities that I like to follow. But awe is like what reminds us that it's not just about me. And so this was not in Jonathan Haidt's book because he's not a believer, but thinking about what is God calling us to. Just some things that came to the top of my mind is like worship and glorifying him. But oftentimes our phones, our social media, they drive us to worship ourselves or worship celebrities. We're called to humility and hiddenness, thinking about Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount of don't pray, fast, give in order to be seen by others, but do it in like the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And again, that idea of humility and hiddenness, that's pretty antithetical to a lot of what social media is, very performance-based. And even people who are doing good things, it's like, is that doing it to be seen by others? Perhaps it is. And then being slow to anger, being quick to forgive. These are things that the Bible is really clear about. But what we see again and again online is being quick to anger, never forgive, cancel, yell, say things, write comments that you would never say to somebody's face. Just really, really hateful things. And so just understanding that not only are there are all these mental health costs, these physical costs, but there's also a true spiritual cost and a cost to family discipleship. So that was all the negative stuff. What do we do? Are we toast? Subtitle, are we toast? Can we do anything? The good news is yes, we can do things. Just like we touched on at the beginning, we do have like a history as a society of making changes for the safety and protection of kids. But even us, especially as believers, we have like the power of the Spirit in us. We have the hope of Christ in us, and we can share that with our kids. So we're going to talk a little bit about limits. We've got Augustine, however you want to say it, photo in here. So the world tells us that limits are bad and that anything we want, we should have. And that if you dare say that if I want something and shouldn't have it, then you're actually oppressing me and maybe even hating me. But meanwhile, one of our great church fathers had the idea that the goal of a believer is to love things in the right order, so that you do not love what is not to be loved, or fail to love what is to be loved, or have a greater love for what should be loved less. And maybe that's a little hard to read. Maybe sounds like a poem or a riddle or something, but just this idea of like, there are things that we should love best. And like we talked about at the beginning, we want to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, mind, strength. We want to love our neighbor as ourselves. We can love playing sports. We can love Taylor Swift music, whatever, but like, whew, that's way down there. And so this idea of limits is helping us like order our lives and put up guardrails around our lives so that we can love what we need to love best. We can actually love that best. And not that we're always going to succeed at that, but just the idea that limits help us put like our loves in their proper place. And so Justin Earley writes, in the American story, limits are bad. But in the story of God, limits are the way to the good life, even the way to happiness. We know this because Jesus took on the limits of being a man, disciplining himself into a life of sacrifice. Why? So that we could be free from the ultimate limitation of sin and death. True biblical freedom comes through finding the right limitations, not getting rid of all limitations. And so again, what I really want to encourage y'all is not like, oh, everything's so terrible, all these slides are terrible. but that we have a Savior who's our example of like the right limits and who empowers us to do hard things. So another quote from Justin Earley is, the default of modern life is going to be limitless screens unless a parent intervenes and teaches that limits are a good thing. And I think this idea of teaching that limits are good, it goes beyond just like, I'm going to give my kid a phone and then I'm going to put Life 360 or whatever is on it, and it's going to be so locked down that they can't really access anything bad. And I think there's something to that. But I think what we want to aim for even more is like giving them a heart that sees like these limits as good, and giving them a heart that sees self-control as good, and giving them a heart that sees, like we talked about at the beginning, true, abundant, good life is found with Christ. One of the DBU girls said that there's going to come an age, they're like sophomores, I think, in college. And they're like, there came an age in high school where we could get around any actual limit that my parents put on it. Life 360, screen time limits, whatever it is. I could delete apps, then re-add them. I could do whatever. Like, I was like amazed at what they could figure out. So again, if the focus is just on like limit, but not on the heart, then either they're going to hack out of your limits, or the day they turn 18 and go off to college or whatever it is, like they're not going to be any better off. So we really want to be prayerful about and aiming to form their heart in a way that shows them how to choose the better thing. Again, that wisdom, that courage, the ability to be bold enough to choose self-control. And what was really cool is that all of those kids, there's 3 students that I met with. One of them had completely deleted all of his social media since going to college, like on his own accord. And then the rest of them had deleted, like they had like 5 and now they only have like 1, and they get on it not much. And so just to encourage you that like you can raise a child that will choose the good. And I can't give you a 3-step thing to make sure that they will, but I don't want you to feel hopeless. Yes.
Just as a thought off of that, I think the follow-on question of like with freedom and freedom within limits, but I think the follow-up question of your kids saying they want freedom, or what's your freedom to what?
Yeah.
Because I think it all comes into the identity, right? Like, do we live for ourselves, or do we live for something bigger than ourselves? And if we're making ourselves the idol, then yes, it should be freedom to do whatever serves the highest good, which is me. But that's clearly idolatrous, versus if freedom is like, God talks about it, and I was just pulling up, and I think there's a verse in James of like the freedom that to follow the law or whatever it is. But it's like, God's got his plan for us that's way better than anything we can come up with. And if you've got enough of that foundation, then it's like, well, what's the freedom? Do you want the freedom to drive on both sides of the road? How's that going to work when you drive to Disney, right? Like,
Totally.
You're going to get crashed in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And so some of you might hear the word limits, and you might already hear like your child begging you, we want to watch one more show, or like whatever it is that they're into right now. And you may be feeling like, if your children are a little bit older, you may be like, I wish I could go back in time. It's too late for me. Or maybe you have a baby and you're like, this seems like a lot. Like, I got to build this all up from the ground up. This seems really hard. And a lot of us have the thought too, like, if they're not on the screen, then what do I have to do something? Like, they watch a show when I make dinner, or they watch this when I'm doing this really important thing that needs to get done in the house. And I think there's something valid to that. But first and foremost, I just want to work this in really quick. Something that all these books agreed on is that having less screens doesn't mean you have to be like right there in front of your kid's face every moment that they would have been on a screen. It's like they're allowed to be bored. They're allowed to like make up their own fun, especially as they get older. Like playing together, making up their own games, having their own hobbies that they work on, like all of those kinds of things. It's not like they're not on the screen, so I have to make sure that they have a play date or they have something to entertain them. It's like, no, they can be bored, and that's going to be okay, and that's where actually a lot of creativity comes from. But even more so than just that, like, it's okay that they're bored, is the truth that, yes, it is going to be hard, and it's going to be hard on us as parents. But another quote that I liked from Justin Earley was that they're going to want them all the time, them being screens. Even more, you are going to want them all the time to make your afternoon or your car ride or your morning easier. There is a true loss to a parent's time and capacity, but as parents, we take the pain now so our kids don't have to later. And just hearing that idea, we take the pain now so our kids don't have to later, like, what does that make you think of? Who else took on our pain for us? Jesus. This is like when I'm teaching kids ministry and I have a question and the answer is like definitely not Jesus, but they're always just like, Jesus? Like, who helped the Israelites, leave Egypt? Jesus? No, sorry. We're talking about Moses. Anyway, but yes, we are talking about Jesus. He took on our pain. And again, we have this power because we can do hard things for our kids through him, for him, and with him. We sacrifice the ease of our life so our kids can have biblical formation, and we trust that God is honoring our efforts and that he will give us wisdom. A promise that he gives us in Scripture is that when we ask for wisdom, he will give it. And again, there's not a secret to make sure that your kid follows Jesus. I wish there was. There's not a secret to make sure that your kid's always going to make the right choices with their phone or whatever. I wish there was. But I truly do believe that God gives us power and gives us wisdom, and when we come to him with this whole idea of family discipleship, when we do it with him and for him and by his power, he is going to help us in that. So talking more about what can we do, Jonathan Haidt has 4 norms that he proposes in his book. The first, Araceli, can you read the first one? No smartphones?
No smartphones before high school. Parents should delay children's entry into round-the-clock internet access. You can give a basic code for that.
Sweet. Phone-free schools, we're going to skip over that just because we're not at school, but I know that's a big thing that your schools probably are giving out technology, and there's different resources I can point you to about that as well. But let's see.
Actually, this year, schools are pushing no technology.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a big
yeah,
trend.
yeah, as is probably best.
Yes.
Christine, can you read the top right?
Yes. No social media before 16. Let kids get through the most vulnerable period of brain development before connecting them to a fire hose of social comparison and algorithmically chosen influences.
Great job. Wes, can you read the last one?
Far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. That's the way that children naturally develop social skills, overcoming anxiety, and becoming self-governing young adults.
Okay, so now I want y'all to talk with your group. Of those 4 things, is there one that's exciting to you, and is there one that's scary to you? Short, but we've got a little bit more good news to go through, and some practical help for y'all. So we're going to talk about some more practical ideas and some ideas from these books and other resources. But as we kind of go through these ideas of things you can start putting into practice in your home, I don't want you to see this and be like, I'm so overwhelmed. These are all these things I have to do. This is another quote I wanted to read for y'all from Justin Earley is, our best parenting comes when we think less about being parents of children and more about being children of God. So don't worry, rethinking the habits of your household isn't a heavy burden. What's heavy is continuing to do nothing. What's burdensome is continuing to follow default cultural habits. But taking the hand of God and being willing to follow him wherever he leads, that's light. That's the posture of a child. Someone who is stronger than you and who loves you is in charge. And that's good news for parents and children. So just resting, before we go into this kind of last section, resting in the fact that God loves you and he loves your kids even more than you do. And like I said, he wants to be a part of this journey with you, and he wants to give you wisdom, and he wants to give you power and all of these things. And ultimately, it's you can't save your child. You can't control everything that your child does, but there is a God who sees them fully and who knows them fully and who loves them more than you, and that's who's actually in charge. So we're going to talk about where to aim and maybe some new rhythms you want to start with your child or your kids. So first, more and better real-world experiences. So that's, doing adventures. And again, this doesn't mean that you as the parent have to be there for all of these things, but letting them go out and do their own things in the real world, going outside, going on adventures. Jonathan Haidt has an article on his Substack about like a group of teens that went camping overnight without any adults, and everyone was like, "You're a child abuse," and it's like, no, they're teenagers. Like they can do one night of camping and just things like that, real world experience. And they thought it was so cool. They were like, "We did this. This was awesome." Less and better experiences on screens. So less experiences, but when you are on screens, like make sure those are like better experiences, not just like scrolling, but like watching something that has some substance or watching something together. Not just everyone on their own device, but like we're watching things together, we're talking about it together. We'll touch more on that in a couple slides. You want to aim to give your child and kid combo, give your child responsibility and an idea of like a stair-step approach. Like, again, this is something you kind of need to figure out with your own spouse, with your own neighborhood, where you live. But like at a certain age, like let them go out around the neighborhood. We live right by a park. Like I hope that we're still living there in a couple years and like Mallory can go out and play at the park by herself. A couple years, we'll see. But yeah, just as, she's only one, but 3 years old. Bye, Mal. Yeah, she has her one wheel. But just thinking through things of like, where can I give them more responsibility? And again, that is so good for their mental health to know, like my parents trust me that I can go out and like do something. And even if I like get a flat tire on my bike, like I can figure it out, or I can push my bike all the way home is an example I read in the book as well. And it's like, if your parent just comes and picks you up and is like, I helped you, I fixed you, versus like the child scooting their broken bike home, like that's like, I got through something hard and I figured it out and I got home. And then lastly, we want to...
One other give responsibility we were talking about was even with like the technology side from the intellectual responsibility, where they're asking like, hey, my friends have phones and maybe in middle school, can I get one? Well, hey, show me the research.
Yeah.
That has it. I'm open-minded to listening. Here's my concerns, but if you come back showing me the research of where it's better and how it addresses these, I'm happy to have the conversation.
Totally.
Spoiler, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, hey, show me the research on smoking. Great.
Yeah.
Let's have the chat, right?
No, totally. I think that's a great point. And a lot of this, especially y'all with older kids, like you can share a lot of this info with them. But the last part, speaking up and linking up, this is called like a collective action problem, because for so many of us, it's like, I don't want to give my kid a phone, but everyone else in middle school has a phone, and they come home and they're like, everyone's hanging out because they're texting in the group text, and I'm not in the group text because I don't have a phone, and now I have no friends, and I'm a loser, and you're ruining my life. And then you're like, maybe I should just let them text.
Let's go do an experiment.
Yeah. But just this idea of like, if we, like my prayer and hope for tonight, and like I wish like every parent was here, I'm sad that they're not, but just like, if we could say, no, Mallory, not everyone has a phone, because Cole doesn't have a phone, and Jane doesn't have a phone, and Caleb and Kate don't have a phone, and Christine and I mean, they're all very varying ages, but we can point to each other, and they can do fun things with each other. And so many of y'all do live like around the same neighborhoods or in the same neighborhoods. It's like, have a little squad in your neighborhood, have a squad at the church where like we're doing these things together, and where we can point to each other as parents. And I think the more that we're doing that, like the kids themselves will come to recognize like, oh wait, it's actually more fun playing with my friends in the neighborhood than like everyone sitting and watching one kid play video games, whatever it is. So this is another book that had a lot of practical tips, Opt Out Family, how to give your kids what technology can't. And so this like spells out opt out. The first idea, offering built-in alternatives to technology. So all of these books also have like a whole website where it has resources on it. And so she just talks about like putting things in your home, where it's like, if they're like, can I watch this? You're like, how about you go do that instead? And it's already like there in your house, ready to go. Protecting childhood innocence and free play. And a lot of this comes down to, is your child so overscheduled? And that's something we as parents need to be aware of. Do they come home from school and then we take them right to practice, and then we have to pick up dinner, and then we get home and then they have to do their homework, and then it's time for bed? Do they have like a day where they can breathe? Do they have hours throughout the day where they can breathe, where they can play, where they can go outside? Our job as parents is to help steward that schedule so that they can have these things that they're wired for. We want to teach them the benefits of being different, especially as believers. We don't want our kids to think we're supposed to look like everyone else, because we're not. And we can model that. We'll talk in a bit about how parents can model all of these things. But teaching your kids that being different is part of following Jesus is a huge and important lesson to teach them. Offsetting consumption with creation. Andy Crouch has a huge thing about this as well, creating more than you consume. So again, it's not just we're watching videos of dancing, of cooking, of sports, but we're doing it. Uniting different social circles, linking up like we talked about, and trusting and building trust with your children. And I wanted to touch on this again, similar to what we were talking about with the limits and like truly trying to grow their heart towards self-control. I felt like my parents had a lot of trust in me growing up, and kind of my story is I was saved when I was like 8 and had like a very genuine like relationship with the Lord as I was growing up, and I think my parents saw that in me, and I like earned their trust, and then they would give me more trust, and then I would, you know, keep their trust, and it was an ongoing like back and forth relationship. But I feel like my parents truly knew that like even if I did make mistakes, like the Spirit was convicting me as well. It wasn't just that they had all of these rules and they would find out if I broke them, but like I had a relationship with the Lord, and if I did something wrong, like even in my own like self through the Spirit, I would feel conviction, and I would come to them with that. And I probably could have done a lot and hid it from them, and that maybe they would have never found out, but like I personally would have known like they trust me, and I like broke that trust. So just this idea of like giving opportunities for your kids to build trust without every monitor, especially again as the stair-step approach as they're getting older, like maybe scaling back on some of the limits or scaling back on some of the monitoring, because there's a difference of like, I know you weren't where you were supposed to be because I'm tracking you, and like the child coming to you, even if it's a couple days later, and being like, Mom, I need to tell you, like when I said I was over at this person's house on Friday, like I actually wasn't. Like which of those would you actually rather have? I don't know. And again, it's not that there's like one perfect way to do this, but just something to think about when it comes to trust. Because there's a whole nother level of like surveillance that's available to us as parents that wasn't available when we were young. And let's see. Oh yeah, just rejecting safetyism, like worshiping safety above all else, is another important part of building trust. And so some things from her playbook, building family culture, like we talked in at the beginning. It's not just here are all the things that are bad about technology, but like here's all the things that are more fun when we're together or when we're outside or when you're with your friends. That idea of wells as something that's drawing people in rather than just walls that's keeping things out or keeping them away. And then making your house, like making room for community, making your house like the low-tech house where people hang out. And I think truly, like we said earlier, like kids are gonna be like, it's actually fun to go to the Allen's house because we play in the backyard, or we go do this, or Mallory lives by a park and her parents let us go play in the park, and, you know, like whatever it is. Yeah. What am I? Okay. So next, okay, so habits of the household, some practical tips from him. I loved his idea of setting expected screen time rhythm. So he's like, every Friday we have a movie night. And we don't watch TV or we don't watch movies if it's not Friday. So instead of your kid being in a is screen time anytime mentality, they're gonna ask for it anytime. As soon as they have 1 second of boredom. Can I watch this? Can I get on my iPad? Can I do this? But if you have it in the rhythm, like, you know that you only can get on your iPad on this day or at this time. You know we're watching movies on Fridays. So he says his answer is, can we watch a movie? Is it Friday? No. Okay. You know, like, and after a while, they don't ask every day because they know if it's not Friday, we're not watching a movie. And then watching together and processing together. I remember this girl that I grew up with whose mom only let her watch G movies, and we were all like in middle school. And people would be like, I don't want to invite Juliana to the birthday party because we can't watch Twilight. We have to watch whatever, you know? And so I think you don't have to be like, if my kid hears a cuss word in a movie, everything's ruined. It's like, no, you can watch things together and you can process them together. So he gives the example of the Sandlot? Yeah, Wendy Pfeffercorn or whatever. And he's like, they're kind of like objectifying the lifeguard girl. And so he says, I will not be there the first time someone in school says a demeaning joke about a girl's body to my sons, but I can be there in movies where they do, and I can prepare them for how to react. That's the value of engaging in media with our kids. So there's a level of like watching things together, even if people are making bad choices, which people are always making bad choices in movies these days. But talking about that, like, hey, why do you think they made that decision? Were they thinking about themselves first, or, you know, what was motivating them in that? Or like, if someone said something like that to you about your sister or whatever, like, how could we talk to them? And like, talking about it together. Curating good content, like we talked about, better, less, and better experiences on screens. I'll send y'all out a whole list from Justin Early's wife about like, these are my favorite things to watch together that like have kind of a good meaning. And offering generous exceptions. So I don't want you to hear all these rules and be like, I am now the czar of screen time and I rule with an iron fist. But like he says, you know, your kid's championship baseball game got rained out. It's like, okay, it's not Friday, but like we're gonna watch a movie because we're all bummed out about that. Or like your kid's sick. It's like they can watch a TV show while they're sick on the couch. So offering generous exceptions. And then I just loved his idea that nothing is normal until it is. So with older kids, if you're maybe reassessing some habits, it's like you may have to talk to them like, hey, I've been learning. I love this. I can't remember who I heard this phrase from, but like, hey, you're 12, like you just turned 12. Like I've never been a mom of a 12-year-old before. So you know how you're learning and growing when you go from being 11 to 12? I'm learning and growing because I'm a mom of a 12-year-old now. I've never done that before. And I'm learning some new stuff about how being on this all the time, like it's actually, it hurts us and it keeps us from like the fun things. Well, you know, however you want to word it. But like, especially if you have older kids, like talk to them about it. Talk to them about, hey, this is why we're doing this. And it's going to be hard, but I think ultimately it's going to be worth it. And then if you're starting young, it's like, make it normal from the get-go. This was an interesting resource from wiredhuman.org on when is your child ready for a device. And so the driving idea is you want them to have like less devices, give them later, and have limits on them. But it's a pyramid. So again, it's not that we necessarily have like one foolproof way of knowing, but does your child know how to communicate offline with parents, siblings, and friends? Does your child show responsibility when it comes to chores, schedule, and homework? Does your child self-regulate and willingly turn off TV, internet, video games? Does your child show respect when using a device? It's like you're walking with them through those steps, you're teaching them about those steps, and maybe if you're like seeing all of those things really responsibly, then maybe you're like, yeah, we're ready to start talking about it. And you can show them that too, like we were saying. And then, okay, we're almost done, I promise. Andy Crouch has 10 tech-wise commitments. We want to create more than we consume. We've touched on that. He talks about filling the center of our home with things that reward skill and active engagement. So he's like, I have our piano, I have our instruments. Since reading this book, we got rid of our TV. We have a projector now. And I started learning the guitar this year. And it's so fun. And just this idea of like, yeah, I could be sitting on my phone for hours after we put Mal down, but it's like now I'm like doing something that's fun, that's creative. And like we still watch stuff with the projector, but it's not like everything's focused on this. We are designed for a rhythm of work and rest. So 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year, we turn off our devices and worship, feast, play, and rest together. We wake up before our devices do, and they go to bed before we do. I bolded that one like we talked about earlier. So important that your phone's not in your room for you as an adult and especially for your kids. It helps them sleep more, helps them stay out of the sad things that happen at night. You might be like, but my alarm. There's many alarm clocks out there you can get, don't worry. We even have this box thing that like you put your phone in the box and it charges the box and it makes it like a game of like whose phone's in the box the most. So there's lots of things out there to help y'all in this. I'm telling y'all, this last year of research, I was like, Daniel, we got to make some changes. Andy Crouch truly, he's on another level. No screens before double digits is what his family did at school and at home. So they literally didn't have a TV or anything until the kids were 10. We use screens for a purpose and we use them together rather than using them aimlessly and alone. We've touched on that a lot. Car time is conversation time. I think he said his limit was a 9-hour car ride. If it's longer than 9 hours, we can watch something. But if it's less, then we're talking, we're listening to music together, we're looking out the window and playing the games that we had to play when we couldn't watch movies on our long car rides. Like, we did it. They can do it too. Spouses have one another's passwords. Parents have total access to kids' devices. And then another kind of unique thing that I didn't see in any other book, but I think music's really important to his family. It's just this idea of singing together rather than letting recorded and amplified music take over our lives in worship. And one of the things of like what's been different 100 years ago than today is like in the old days, if you wanted to hear music, you had to play an instrument, or you had to go over to be with somebody who could play an instrument, or you had to sing. And that's why people, like you read Little House on the Prairie or whatever, it's like they sing together, they're doing these instruments together. It's like now music is something we just like hit play. And so his family has found a lot of like purpose in learning instruments, singing together, all these things, which I thought not everyone has to do, but is a cool thing to think about. So that is kind of some practical tips. We're going to move into a little more just like gospel focus at the end. But did anyone want to like share anything that maybe their families put into practice that they think's been going well? Any ideas from the crowd? Or is everyone just here to learn, basically?
One of the things I was reminded of recently is like when our boys were little, we'd always, the phrase that came out of my mouth often was first time obedience. Like, we're gonna be the first time, you know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm having to like rewire them again with video games, because it's always like, oh, can I just finish this one round, or can I just finish this one at bat on a baseball game,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like, okay, I had to remind Jet, I was like, remember when you were little, and I would always say first time obedience. I was like, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to remind myself of that too, because I'd be like, okay, one more minute, you know, and I'm like, wait, no, that wasn't allowed when they were toddlers. Why is it allowed now?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, but it just, I don't know. It's like it's a new phase, but like same idea.
Yeah, that's good.
Or the pivot on that we've had is sometimes then how do you prime them for success? Like, is it something that we can avoid on our part? And I'm not saying on yours, because it's the tension of first time obedience versus am I telling them right in the moment versus, hey, in 3 minutes we're going to turn this off and it's time to go. Sometimes we found that helps alleviate it, but sometimes you just need them to go, and that's when they need to obey the first time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Oh, there's countdowns, trust
Yeah.
me. I'm a teacher at heart. There's a countdown, but it's always still.
Yeah.
Were you saying something?
I was thinking like, yeah, it's like how long is a baseball game? Like, don't start one when you know I'm about to tell you that in 5 minutes it will turn off.
Yeah. Okay. So just wanted to say it again. Nothing is.
Sorry, we just try to, it's always an ongoing fluid thing. I mean, our oldest is 13 down to our youngest being 6, and the 6-year-old then thinks they should have everything 13 has. Like, we just try to have it as an active conversation. I mean, it's all the caveats, but it's like, let's have the fluid give and take, and we'll try different things, and if you handle it well, if you're responsible, you'll get more responsibility. If you're not responsible, you'll have less. Like,
Yeah.
it's not perfect, but it's just like letting them know that it's fluid, and let's have the discussion together. And
How do you handle like what you feel is appropriate for say like a 13-year-old to watch versus a 6-year-old to watch? I mean, like, this is something I ran into today.
Yeah.
Just on TV.
It varies partly. So like Reese, some of hers, the shows she'll want to watch. For those who don't know, Reese is our 13-year-old. Reese will watch one show oftentimes after the other kids go to bed because the others all go to bed early. The trick is Chloe, who's 7, has figured out that once, because you can have the parent approve to download a game, but then once it's been approved to download, someone else can download it onto their iPad. So we'll have it where you can set different screen time limits for each one. I mean, there's always the go rounds, but at least at this point they're young enough that it's generally in place.
Yeah.
So we'll set different apps have different amounts of limits. Like if they want to do Prodigy, which is a math game, or Duolingo or something, they have more limits on that and then less on games. And sometimes it's like if the kid's acting up, we'll take their game thing down to like 1 minute. Intentionally not 0, so that they're reminded that they don't have it. But it's like, we're making it up as we go. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
And then we'll just try to have discussions. Like some of them are like, we're enjoying watching the Marvel movies with the older kids, judges if people want, because some of them but it's like, we'll talk about it. In life, you're going to encounter things that there shouldn't be, but that's going to cause nightmares in the younger kids. So hey, older kids, if you can help us get the younger kids tucked in sooner, we'll have more time to watch Marvel.
No, I like that.
Yeah, that's
Try to
good.
make everything a negotiation and win-win.
No, that's good.
Doesn't always work.
So I just wanted to reiterate that idea that like nothing is normal until it is, and this is going to be like, it's going to take being proactive, it's going to take focus, it might take like reworking things if you've already found yourself down one path and now you want to correct course. But I just hope that like you see that it is worth it. So last thing we got to talk about is us. As parents, we got to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, y'all. So we have to practice what we preach, especially older kids. They have a hypocrisy nose. They're like, you're a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite. Like, you don't do that. I remember saying that to my parents all the time. So we just have to be aware in checking our own phone habits. And it's not just that the kids are missing their childhood when they're always on their phone. It's that you're missing their childhood. And there are things that like only you can offer them that the screens can never offer them. Eye contact, touch, a hug, like all of that stuff is what you're missing if you're like, oh, hold on, I'm just checking this thing. And there's like reports now of even little kids like Mallory, like she can't walk yet, but it's like 2-year-olds running up and like slapping the phone out of mommy's hand because they're like, look at me, look at me. It's like they don't have the language for that yet, but they're asking for it. And obviously as our kids are older, you may be hearing that from them, like you're always on your phone or whatever it is. So just being aware of our own habits and thinking about what are we taking in, what are we hoping for? Similar to how our kids can be fed negative content, we can also be fed negative content. We're probably not on TikTok for 6 hours a day, but many of us have our own addictions. We want more knowledge, we want more control, we want more safety. Reagan and I have talked a lot about like as new moms, it's like you want to be like 3 a.m. feed. My baby is blinking slow, like what's wrong? You know, it's like you're so tempted to like Google at all hours of the night. And then like we've talked about with the algorithm, it's like, oh, you're a mom? Let us send you every scary thing about being a mom. Here's 3 tips on how to make your baby sleep perfectly at 2 weeks. Just buy my thing. And you're like, oh, do I need to buy this thing? And it's like they're feeding you stuff. They're wanting your, like we said, fear, anger, sadness. So much of it is driven by like, buy my thing, buy my thing. Then you'll finally know all of the tips on being a good parent if you buy my thing. It's like, no, they just want your money. Or maybe our kids are older and we want to give them the smartphone so that we can track them. Oh, we can track them now. We can know where they are. Because if we know where they are, nothing bad can ever happen to them. Or our kid is away at camp and we're just refreshing the camp website. I got to see their picture. I got to see a picture of them. I hope they're having fun. Then you see, oh, is that him in the back? And he's like, and you're like, oh, he's not smiling. I got to drive out there and pick him up. And it's like all of these things can feed our fears as well. And so just this idea of what's sold to parents in many ways is like more monitoring, more Googling, more control, more safety. But we are now becoming like the anxious parenting generation. And so we have to think about what are we hoping for? What are we looking for? In some ways, we're trying to put ourselves in the place of God. If I have the tracking app, I'm omnipresent. If I can read all the texts they've ever sent, then I'm omniscient. I know everything they've ever said. You know, I'm all powerful because I can turn it off whenever I want, whatever it is. But there's only one person who is all of those things, and it's God. And He doesn't want us to have the burden of thinking that we need to be those things for our kids. And the truth is, we can't keep them from ever getting hurt. We can't keep them from seeing something bad. We can't keep them from seeing something bad on their friend's phone because we didn't give them a phone, but their friend has a phone. You know, it's like there's only so much that we can do. And so there's like a level of freedom knowing, again, that we have a loving Father who is our parent and is their parent and who loves them more than we do. And so I just wanted to end with this idea of hope for us and hope for our kids. So we don't have to hold on to our phone so tightly. We can let go as parents and instead be held by the only one who truly is all-powerful, omnipresent, and who is infinitely loving and gracious and merciful and cares about our kids. We can surrender to the one who actually always sees them, deeply knows them, and guides them. We can surrender to the one who has given them, or our kids can surrender to the one who has given them identity, who has given them purpose, who has called them beautiful, even if their selfie isn't getting likes or whatever it is. And we can surrender to the one who wants to fill this God-shaped hole in our hearts with His abundant peace and presence. He wants us to have that full and beautiful life, and He wants us to bring our kids into that too. He's with you in this. You want your family to grow in wisdom and courage, like God is with you in that, and you can like live by prayer, live by the Spirit, and just trust that He is with you in that. There is good news. All of these reports show that teens who are rooted in religious communities have the best mental health. And we know we're not just a religious community, but we know that we're a family. We are like God's family. We are more than just like, you come here and it's kind of cool and fun, but like we are connected by grace and love. We've been saved by a God who cares so much about our real embodied life that he came down and lived a real embodied life and died on the cross for our sins and saved us. And so I just want you guys to know, like, this was a lot of negative information. And like I said, it caused me to make some changes in my own life. And I hope that there's things that you're thinking about maybe changing in your life as well. But this isn't meant to scare you. If anything, I want you to feel empowered and equipped. And ultimately, I want you to take heart knowing that he has overcome the world. Obviously, smartphones aren't mentioned in the Bible, but this is not a surprise to the Lord. He's not like, oh, dang, my people are really dealing with something I didn't see coming now. Like, he's with us in this, and he is powerful over this, and he has overcome the world. So I wanted to end with a final quote from our guy, Andy Crouch. And he says, let me put it this way. You don't have to become Amish, but you probably have to become closer to Amish than you think. This better way involves radically recommitting ourselves to what family is about, what real life is about. Our homes are meant to be places where the very best of life happens. The very best of life has almost nothing to do with the devices we buy. It has a lot to do with the choices we make, choices that our devices often make more difficult. We are meant for so much more than technology can ever give us, above all, for the wisdom and courage that it will never give us. We are meant to spur one another along on the way to a better life, the life that really is life. Why not begin living that life together now? So I just hope that encourages you all of like the abundant life that Christ is offering you and is offering your kids, and that you can help be a part of inviting your kids into. So thank y'all for listening. I know that was long. That was a lot of talking. It is 8:45, so if y'all have to go now, please do grab some more food on the way out. But if you want to stay and we can do some Q&A for a while, I got a babysitter, so I'm here for a while. Daniel's mom's holding it down. We're good.